Hey everyone, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. Today we're talking about Deuteronomy chapter 11 in hopefully 5 minutes. There's a lot to talk about, so let's jump in. This PDF that you're seeing up on the screen is free on our website to anybody who wants it. When did the events of this chapter happen? We are in about 1450 BC. This is right after the Israelites finished their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. They're just about to go into the land of Canaan. We don't have too much going on in terms of new characters. We're still talking about our main characters. Those are the Israelite nation and Moses, who is in charge of leading the Israelites to the Canaan Land. In terms of our map and where these events took place, I have added a few new locations to the map, which we'll talk about in a second, but we are still located in Moab near Mount Pisgah. That's where Moses was presenting these speeches to the Israelites. Now, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, you'll see there on the left side of the Jordan River on the top right corner of your map. They've been added and they're highlighted in this chapter. They are mountains on the west side of the Jordan River. We'll talk about why they're significant in our outline. Now we can jump over to page 2 and our first section, verses 1 through 9, remembering the miracles of the Lord. So Moses wanted the Israelites to meditate on the greatness of God and on his mighty wonders that he had shown and that they had been privileged to observe in their time as God's people. He wanted them to remember the 10 plagues on Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and how God had caused the earth to break open and to swallow Dathan and Abiram when they rebelled against him in the wilderness. And if you don't know that story, you can read about it in Numbers chapter 16. Meditating on these things would ensure that the Israelites remained faithful to God as they entered the promised land and that they had confidence that God had the power to help them conquer the land. The next section I've entitled Canaan, a land cultivated by God. This is verses 10 through 17. So Canaan was not a land like Egypt. In Egypt, the Israelites had to irrigate their crops, probably from the Nile River. And if you've ever seen any history documentaries on Egypt, they'll often talk about the irrigation systems that they built, and they were kind of impressive. But Canaan wasn't a place where that was going to have to happen. In Canaan, God sent rain on the hills and on the valleys there, and the land drank up the water from heaven. The Israelites were told that Canaan was, quote, a land that the Lord your God cares for. So as long as the Israelites were faithful to God, God promised that he was going to continue to make Canaan a place where it was easy for crops to grow and for livestock to flourish. But if they disobeyed God, he would stop up the rain clouds and he would withdraw his blessing from the land. The final section, verses 18 through 32, a blessing and a curse. So Moses repeated his instruction for the Israelites to keep God's covenant in the forefront of their minds. And I just want to read verses 18 through 20 in the words of Moses here. He says, quote, you shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets before your eyes. You shall teach them to your children. Talk of them when you are sitting in your house, and when you are walking by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So they were supposed to be, the Israelites were supposed to be thinking about these instructions all the time, always thinking about their relationship with God and the way that they should be living because of that. A blessing and a curse were put before Israel. This is the same blessing and curse that we've been talking about. If the Israelites were faithful, God would bless them. If they weren't faithful, God would curse them. Now, this blessing and curse were to be formally pronounced over the camp of Israel later on when they entered the promised land. And they were supposed to be pronounced or heralded from 2 different mountains. Those are the mountains that we mentioned on our map. The blessing was to be announced from Mount Gerizim, and then the curse was to be announced from the top of Mount Ebal. In terms of our application, this chapter makes it clear that God can work through things like weather and agriculture to lift nations or to humble nations. There is a supernatural guidance to these processes that appear to us to be purely natural when we look at them. There is an unseen and often unrecognized divine hand manipulating nature, and it is working out God's will as time goes on. So keep that in mind. Sometimes we look at the world and we think, well, everything's just, nature running its course. But texts like this help us to understand that no, there is more to it than that. Even if we can't recognize exactly how it works, God is behind these things. He's moving variables around in unseen ways so that what he wants done is done.